Hello, everyone, and welcome to Gaming Mechanics, a podcast seeking to explore the unexplored topics of games, how they work, and why we love them. I'm your host, Mark, and with me always is Greg.
Yep, sure am.
And this week, as promised, we're going to be discussing the way that Destiny develops its lore. I know
Yay! It's me clapping.
that, yes, Greg is
I'm
very
so
excited about
excited.
this episode.
I am excited.
And I'm
Yeah.
excited
Oh,
to
sorry. Go ahead,
hear
Mark.
a lot of what he has to say because some of this I don't know either. So
Oh
we'll both
yeah,
be.
yeah, I guess so.
I will be,
All right, so
dear
yeah,
listener, I will be in your corner along for the ride.
kind of yeah. So this week we're going to do as we previously stated, it's not going to be necessarily about the content of the lore as opposed to the way that it was communicated across Destiny 1 and 2 and what changed between those two things and what worked and what didn't. But that being said, we are going to need some common knowledge for just talking about a few different things, just so you know kind of what we're talking about. It is Destiny is a first-person MMO-ish shooter. Made by Bungie, the people who did Halo. Halo is actually very similar in a lot of regards. If you play the Halo games, you have a decent idea of the setting in some ways, where you have kind of near future humans versus a lot of different aliens and some space magic involved as well. So, real briefly, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the lore, or just the setting at least. You play as a guardian. That is the key word there. Guardians are humanoids, either humans or exos, which are just robots, or awoken, which are kind of space humans, which I won't even get more into. They're just humans. Treat them as humans.
Yeah, they're humans,
All
but
of
they're
them are,
woke.
they're woke. Yeah, they're blue humans basically. And the idea is that there is an interstellar giant orb called the Traveler, which is this giant, huge orb that you've probably seen on the box cover or at some point in any of the marketing, of which there was a lot. And this is a sentient giant orb that has this mystical power called the Light. And the Light is basically it's a lot of this is really undefined in a lot of ways. But the Light is a kind of cosmic force that appears to be basically magic. The word used a lot in the Destiny lore is paracausal, which just means it's outside of normal causality, which means that, yeah, you can make physics work in a way that they would normally wouldn't. So it's just a catch-all term for good magic is the Light in this case. And so the Traveler goes around to different civilizations and basically uplifts them or brings them into a golden age of technology. So it comes to Earth and it brings humanity into this huge golden age where we evolve and we advance and life is good. And then there's another metaphysical force called darkness, which is also hugely undescribed, and in fact we will see later in this episode might not even exist anymore. That is the Traveler's nemesis. Converges, it's been chasing it, and something happens. The darkness finally catches up to Earth, and the Golden Age collapses in an event called the Collapse. We don't know anything about what happened. We don't even know what the darkness is. We just know that the Traveler sacrifices itself to save humanity and dispels the darkness. And so the Traveler now remains inert. It's just floating over what's called the last city. There's one city left on Earth, basically, that's still civilized. And the darkness has been pushed away, but humanity's golden age is shattered, and we are basically reduced to one city. Now, the only thing is the saving grace is the fact that when the Traveler sacrificed itself, it released all of these little tiny robots called ghosts, and as voiced by Nolan North. And they go out and seek out heroes, basically, ancient heroes or more recent ones, people who have died. And these ghosts have the power to resurrect people. And they go out and find these people who are worthy of the Light, and they gift them the Light, and hence these are guardians. Guardians are these. You're actually immortal, so there's an in-game reason for how you respawn. Whenever you die, your character dies, your ghost can resurrect you entirely. So your character is immortal. You are a incredibly accomplished warrior because you've lived all these lives and died and come back and learned from each one, as well as you have this metaphysical force called the Light, which gives you a bunch of space magic, depending on your class. And in large part, God, that's a mouthful, even just for the really basic. That is the most basic version of Destiny lore I can give you. There's a bunch of enemies, alien and extraterrestrial, and evil dark magic and weird robotic artificial intelligence and militarized empires and space pirate bugs. And all kinds of other stuff. But at baseline, you are a human basically guarding the last city on Earth. as this superhuman guardian, and that is your role. And with that, I think we will go into that is good lord.
Yeah.
I basically just gave you the opening cutscene of Destiny 1 and 2. That is actually almost literally, pretty much literally all the information you get going into the game. So I just told you all those things. The game starts, right? And you're on Earth. And so Mark, do you want to talk about how the rest of the story is told in Destiny 1?
Yeah, I mean, so, that's a really cool setup, by the way.
Yeah,
I
it's
can
a great
imagine
setting, actually.
turning on Destiny 1 for the first time and being like, wow, this is going to be cool. Like, I love the paracausal thing, and like how it allows them to ground magic in a hard sci-fi sort of world. Okay, maybe not hard sci-fi, at least soft, medium sci-fi sort of world.
Yeah.
And anyway, I think that's really cool in creative storytelling. But unfortunately, when once you start Destiny 1, I mean, what do you do? It's sort of like, well, you're a guardian of this last city, so I guess it's just time to start guarding some crap. So
it's actually exactly what happens. You're on patrol.
You don't really get much more narrative in the game. So the way that campaign, Destiny 1 develops its story is through Grimoire cards. So you'll do things in the game, or you'll unlock through special actions and special interactions, ability to access these cards, the ability to go actually in an area outside of the game onto the Destiny website and be able to look at the Grimoire cards. So this isn't even like an item you unlock in the game. This is something that you unlock on a website. And so
that is super important to note.
Yeah, it's
it wasn't even in the game.
It's not in the game. But that is the closest thing you get to narrative development and storytelling in Destiny 1, apart from the opening scene that Greg just described. So you'd go through a game, you'd see an enemy for the first time, you kill it, it says Grimoire card unlocked, and then maybe sometime later when you're not playing the game, you go onto the website and you read this card. And these cards are not straightforward descriptions of things necessarily. Sometimes they are. Sometimes it's like, this
some of the very early ones are.
This is a Goomba, you jump on its head. Like, sometimes it's really simple stuff like that. But sometimes it's like transcriptions of a radio conversation with static. I mean, sometimes it's poems, it's sentence fragments. It's like
sometimes it's like straight code from like a computer readout.
Yeah, it's
other times
all kinds
it's just
of things.
Dialogue, like a voice recording that you found.
So even once you go through the work of going onto the website to read the card, there's still more work to be done to piece together what was happened in the story.
They're incredibly esoteric. Some of them.
Yeah, some of them are. Yeah.
Like I went back and you can read all of the entire grimoires up online. Obviously, you can just find all of them for free. And I've read the entire thing, actually, the entire Destiny 1 grimoire, and even having every single piece at my availability at every step of the way, I had to. This we'll kind of get into. This is a decent little offshoot here. I had to look up YouTube videos to help. There's a whole actual community about the Destiny 1 lore that sprang up because these Destiny cards were there are two reasons. One, because they were so esoteric, like I said, they're so confusing, and but two, because they're so good. I'm going to maintain. So Destiny 1 got tons of heat, and rightfully so, for the fact that its main campaign literally almost had no narrative. And I can go deeper into that, but seriously, go just find a Let's Play of Destiny 1's campaign, and watch it without any other sources, or don't go to the wiki, don't go to anything, and it will be almost incoherent. I promise you. I was actually shocked. Like, I heard about this, and I was like, okay, it can't be that bad. Like, there's no way a AAA game can ship with like almost no story in the way that people describe. And I watched it, and I was like, that actually didn't make sense. Like, that was incredible. That was like a mini game or something. Like, so it really is as bad as people said. Like I said, you can take my word for it. You can watch it. But the thing that's really interesting, especially with Destiny 2's release, is that we're going to get into. But actually, so Mark did some research too, and was reading through it. And like I said, I actually got super into the lore, having actually never even played the game, which is something I do anyway. But the lore is fantastic, which is exactly what Mark noted at the beginning. Actually, a lot of the hooks and a lot of the stories are really good. In fact, they wrote for one of the one of the expansions for Destiny, the original Destiny, they actually brought in a legit sci-fi writer. I forget his name, but he did this whole series of again, they're Grimoire cards, but called the Books of Sorrow, that are also read fantastically just as a standalone piece of sci-fi. So, like I said, the quality was actually off the charts. The bizarre thing was, one, the absolute lack of integration, which is just staggering to me. That, like, it'd be one thing if that was in game, right? Other games do that.
Yeah.
But, like, the fact that that wasn't even, you had to exit the game and get on a computer to find even the most basic lore. Seriously, literally, like, there's 4 kind of main enemies that you're fighting.
I didn't even think about it, but it's worth noting that, yes, this is a console game, so you're not already at your computer. You don't just Alt-Tab and pull up a window. You, like, have got to go find a computer or get on your phone. You literally have to switch devices in order to read the lore.
Which is just absolutely unacceptable, right? Like, that is just so far away from, like, any standard of storytelling. Like, that is worst case scenario almost.
Yeah.
Anyway, so like I was saying, the reason and the cool thing that I found was that there's this actually very active and very large community of people that were really into Destiny lore, because it was actually really good and it was really compelling, and specifically even the form of the Grimoire cards, not necessarily the lack of integration with the game, but the fact that they were, one, they were all written, so that's good. You don't have to worry about, like, bad cutscenes or voice acting.
Right.
That definitely helps. But 2, it's the sheer amount of different forms, like we were mentioning earlier, built this really, really cool and compelling world, and it bred mystery, it bred curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
It also matched with even the form and function of the game, where the collapse had happened, and you as your character, actually, you lost all the records from what happened before the collapse. You don't really know anything about the Golden Age. It's this very esoteric thing. You're trying to piece back together your civilization, and so it actually matches the way your character would feel.
Yeah,
I think it's actually a brilliant system in some ways.
I really like the idea of having a grimoire system, and I think part of the reason is because it's how we encounter history for real. Like,
yeah, exactly.
when you're born, you don't get to see all the cutscenes from all the important moments of history. Like, you've got to go either. What most people do is they have historians digest what happened and then retell it in some sort of cohesive narrative. But what historians have got to do is look at fragments of texts, conversations and letters between people they never met, try to infer motivations behind things that people were saying. They may or may not be right. Like, these are all things that we just trust historians to do as a society. But Grimoire cards actually give you a chance to become a historian of a world you've never been to, which is really cool.
Exactly. Which is worth noting, actually. I didn't even think about it, but what you just described, that historian, like, and without we're talking about video games here, and particularly just one video game, so let's not get too self-important. But literally, that community I found online of the YouTubers, guys like My Name is Biff and Mylan Games were the 2, or Sir Wallen those were the 3 of them that are fantastic. All 3 of them were really, really good. But that's actually what they did in their videos. They would take all these different Grimoire cards. It was cool. They would read all of them, and they would link them together in a way. They would pull on different sources, basically, and then they would tell a story through. Sometimes they'd be speculative. Sometimes they'd be just giving you the narrative without you having to put together. So on one hand, it is a ton of work. Right. Like we said, we actually need dedicated content creators to be able to explain it. But on the other hand, that is an impressively deep and compelling story that you built. So that's actually really cool. And like I said, the problem was that there was absolutely no integration with the game itself, as well as arguably probably many people who were playing Destiny, due to a lot of its MMO sequences, which we'll get up to later, probably weren't even looking for that much narrative.
Right.
So, and there are other things, like, Mark, you mentioned actually correctly too, I hadn't thought of, but even the way you get Grimoire cards in the game is totally arbitrary, right? Like you said, it's kind of more like an achievement-based system, where, like, you encounter this type of enemy, then you unlock it, or, like, you do kill this many types of things in this amount of time and you unlock one, or go to this place.
So
it's not like there's any in-game
a
reason.
plot.
Exactly. Yeah, no. Congratulations, yeah, dude. That's exactly true, though. It's really sad.
You got some sense of direction.
Yeah, God. It's really, like I said, we're really not actually, like, I'm not trying to hate on Destiny at all, honestly. Like I said, I want to give it credit for what it did well and hate on what it didn't do well. But oh my God, like, it's hard to overstate how little story there is in the original Destiny. It is abhorrent.
In some ways, when I was
And similarly, the
looking,
grimoire system isn't very elegant, right? Like it's like you said, the grimoire isn't a real thing in the game, right? You don't actually find these cards, and your character isn't learning any of these things. It's just you as the player.
right. Yeah, in some ways, when I was looking over Destiny 1 and how they did story, I was like, I think they really had a chance to kind of do what Eve did for having an economy, but with story.
Sure.
In that, like, they tried to do it in a way that was really realistic, just like Eve does the economy in a way that's very realistic, and it adds a lot of richness and character to the game. But there are
Right.
certain things you can't make fully realistic with story, or you can, but you got to be very careful because the person that you're playing as in Destiny is a significant character. Like in
Yes.
Eve, you're basically nobody. Like and
Right. You could
story
be
wise,
anyone.
you're nobody. Like
Right.
there really isn't a story of you becoming or doing anything important in Eve.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
You make your own story. We've talked about this before. But in Destiny 1 and 2, you are an important person in the story, and what you do is very significant. And so it's a little weird to be completely disconnected and just like a historian. Like, if Destiny 1 was you were some basically Indiana Jones style
Yeah. Sure.
space
Sure.
pirate going around, space mercenary, trying to figure out cool things about history and save
Yeah.
ancient
Seriously.
artifacts and stuff, that actually would have worked really well with the Grimoire cards
That's
because
a great point.
what your character is doing is research then. Like, but
Yeah.
you're not. You're a guardian. You're like supposed to kind of know what's going on. In fact, presumably there's a chain of command and people who are in charge of telling you what to do.
Exactly. Yeah. That's actually really, dude. Like Destiny reimagined as a like space archaeology game would have been awesome.
Yeah.
That would have been so cool. But it's actually it's not. You are the superhuman warrior who is pushing back all the forces of darkness almost single handedly.
Right. You're doing something very intentional,
and that's when he's
but you have no idea why you're doing it, which is weird.
precisely, precisely. And you should. And so that's another thing that happens. Actually, I just want to go back. That's a really brilliant because then when you discovered a grimoire card, then you actually have your character absorb the information and be like, whoa, this is a new thing that you could basically. Another problem that we found with the grimoire system is that it's really good and might be even ideal in terms of giving backstory and giving setting building and giving ambiance and, like I said, mystery and kind of organic control to the player in the way that they absorb the story. But the one thing what you can't do necessarily is any forward narration at that point.
Right.
You can do all of the backward narration, but you can't move forward at all with that sort of system. Which is why the archaeology idea is so interesting, because ideally, I think you can. It's just really, really hard, and Destiny 1 didn't do this at all. But I think ideally the idea would be, right, like you're in some place and you don't really know anything about it. Then you find this piece of information and you put it together, and your character in real time discovers that. And suddenly either A, past experiences you have make more sense, or B, the current mission, the reason that you're doing a thing is suddenly in focus. And
Right.
your character can realize that, and that'll change the way that you interact with the world or these enemies or the way you think about them or the way that you think about the task that you're doing or you as a character in the setting. That would be
Right.
cool. That's not what happened. And,
Yeah, there's no point of focus. Like the best
Yeah.
the best that happens in Destiny is the plot advances, you do something, and then you find out later why you did that and why it was significant. Like that's
Exactly.
like
No,
best
it's-
case scenario.
precisely it, actually. And in large part, like I said, even with the beginning, like the opening campaign, so there were 3 expansions for Destiny, 4 kind of, if you count one that didn't really have any story content. But in large part, there were 3 expansions, 3 big raids. They were single player and that were PvE designed, and those moved the story, right? Something happened there. But especially for the original campaign in Destiny 1, like almost again, literally there was almost no narrative. There's almost no narration. There's a single character that appears to you called the Stranger. Oh, this is another thing that I wanted to mention real quick with Destiny lore. They instituted a naming system that actually originally would have sounded good to me until I actually had to get into it and became counterproductive. They instituted what I've called the naming system, like THE.
Which in and of itself is probably a terrible name for a system, but
exactly, it actually demonstrates itself very well, because it is the and then one word. And so this is literally off the top of my head. I'm going to go through it. We got the Guardian, the Light, the Traveler, the City, the Vanguard, the Wall, the Darkness, the Fallen, the Reef, the Awoken, the Cabal, the Hive, the Taken, the Vex. What else we got? The Speaker,
the City,
the Stranger, the City, the Crucible, the War Mines. Yeah, that's just I just counted, what is that, 14 things just off the top of my head. Oh yeah, the Black Garden, the Vault of Glass, all these different things that are like not descriptive at all. And in some ways, I think the idea there was to try to simplify the really, really interesting and deep lore, so you didn't have to memorize. What was the one you came up with, Mark? Like Zakrath or something like that?
Yeah, Zorgoth and
Zorgoth
Blackmore, and just like all these weird sci-fi type names. Exactly.
Yeah.
Xenopho and
yeah. Hex the Reckoner. Rex the Heckner. Anyway, so the problem with that, like I said, I think the idea there was to avoid confusion and having to learn all these weird esoteric names. But on the flip side, what actually that does is that it when you do literally everything with that, and there's like nothing that's just named,
right.
it becomes really confusing actually. Like trying to remember the difference between the Hive and the Cabal eventually becomes really weird because you only have one word to describe them.
Right.
And when everything is it actually kind of begins to blend together significantly, as well as feel kind of cheap and kind of inane. Like usually when you kind of just title something, that means it's like really cool
important,
or like significant or like badass or like kind of singular.
Right.
And when everything is that, it kind of sucks away part of the specialness of having like the title. So that's my brief thing on the system there.
Yeah,
which,
that's a really an interesting case of when everything is important, nothing is. Like is
exactly.
used to highlight typically. Like if I was like, I'm going to like the city, like it would be like the most important city, but everything has the in front of it, so it's just,
exactly.
It's silly.
So it kind of lost some of that power. But anyway, so I think, I can't remember exactly the point. We were talking about backward versus forward narrative. And how the fact that Grimoire actually really works well in the forward narrative, or the backward narrative, and not too much in the forward.
Right. It doesn't give you a sense of motion as a player. Like, it doesn't give you the sense that things are happening right now. You never have that moment of clarity, like, oh, I'm going to do this, and it's going to be significant. It's always, I did that, and that turns out that was significant, but I didn't know at the time.
Right. And the other interesting thing was with Destiny 1 was that it was branded as like I said, this kind of step forward in the shooter genre, which is going to be this incredibly the Halo gunplay, which was at the time by far the best kind of in the genre. The idea of having AAA top line shooter experience in this giant shared space, with loot and with levels and abilities and character customization and the ability to interact with other Guardians. And that was a pretty big deal at the time, actually. And in large part, so we can go into all kinds of discussions, and there are plenty of them. We are not going to be the first ones to talk about Destiny or Destiny 2 and why it's been good or bad. But narratively, what that did was it brought us into that realm that we talked about actually way, way back when, I think towards the very beginning of the podcast, which was basically the problem with MMO storytelling in general. The danger that happens when you give your character absolutely you put them in the position of savior of everything, or the most important person in the world who can't actually speak or have any character development or ability to really affect things in a real way. And that is exactly what happened with Destiny. Again, we have this incredibly deep, compelling lore and a lot of possibility for cool interactions with the world. But in Destiny, you are a faceless person who does basically pushes back 4 alien races single-handedly and saves the Earth multiple times, and you don't speak a line of dialogue or interact with your world in any other way. As well as you're surrounded by all these other Guardians who are supposed to be the exact same thing. So it ran into that very quickly, I think, too, where they were trying to do too many things, and then on top of the Grimoire system, it was just a mess, particularly for one of the most anticipated games of probably of the decade at that point.
Yeah, and it also was on the topic of MMOs. It was trying to be an MMO shooter, which at that point is just that's been a notoriously difficult genre to crack. Rivaled probably
no one's hit that actually yet, have they?
Rivaled only by the MMO RTS, which is another probably the only game I can think of that would be even more difficult to make into an MMO.
Yeah,
but
So I mean, so that's just and that's so like I don't want to harp on this too much. Like I said, actually, I love a lot of things about Destiny and have major problems with a lot of other ones. I know it's a very, very polarizing topic. But the one thing I wanted to mention too, just for the MMO storytelling, we're going to see this in Destiny 2. I'm going to move on to that in a second because I watched through all of the lore that exists now for Destiny 2, or very nearly all of it. I don't think I finished all like the side missions and some of the strikes, but I've seen the entire campaign and the Nightfall and the raid. So as is currently available. But the other problem with just MMO story in general is that, in large part, right, and another thing that's really difficult to do, for me at least, as I was watching, consuming these things, was not compare them to Bungie's other massive spacefaring magic superhuman adventure that they did.
Yeah, exactly.
Which you might have heard of, called Halo.
Right.
That
it is
was
very
extremely...
similar. I mean,
yeah,
just in terms of like the
similar.
character that you're playing as a player, like very, very similar roles. Like
exactly, and
yeah.
If you're paying attention even to that very basic story outline I gave of Destiny, it's actually extremely similar to some of the early Halo lore, which is the idea that there was a kind of godly being that would go around uplifting different races, right? In terms of the Forerunners, giving the mantle. Man, Halo did that too in terms of like the Flood, the Covenant. Well, anyway, but the idea of a extraterrestrial god alien giving kind of extra power to these other races, which is exactly what happened in Halo with the Forerunners and then the Covenant and humans. Anyway, point is, there's a lot of similarities, and one thing that Halo was not was an MMO in any way, shape, or form. Right. And say what you will about the Halo narratives in the game, which I think is another very good topic. I don't want to certainly paint with broad strokes and say that those are great, because they weren't in some ways, but they did do some really key things that Destiny didn't, which I'm going to get to in a second. But in large part, the point I was trying to make is basically with any game, it is in fact a product, and there's resource allocation that has to happen within the product. And when you have a multitude of systems, when you have a character building system, when you have a gear system, they tried to do an entire multiplayer based system, a story campaign with voice actors, different worlds, different open world parts, different vendors. That requires developer resources. And guess what? Story probably took second fiddle to a whole lot of that. In Halo, you didn't have to worry about that. You didn't have to worry about all the different loot, all the different guns, all the different transaction systems, all the different resources, all the different ways to interact with other players. There's the campaign, and they could write in the story.
Especially back when Halo 1 came out. I mean, that was like the birth of Xbox Live, essentially, was when Halo became available to play over the internet with other people. And that was, I actually think maybe...
It was the beginning of online gaming in large part. I mean, some people would argue.
And so, they really didn't... They had a lot of network code they didn't have to write or concern themselves with. There was just a whole development burden that was not there, because they just had to render it locally and give you a good story to play with you and a couple friends.
Right, precisely. And that's the thing, on one extreme, right, I'm like this purist, particularly with story and narrative in video games, and I'm like, no, we shouldn't settle for less, and we shouldn't, particularly in terms of narrative. But at the same time, there's some level of you can't expect... They were trying to innovate an entire genre, in large part. And to some extent, the difference between Destiny being a talking point and a masterpiece, which I don't believe it is I think that, basically, the full package. But, that being said, it makes sense, right? It makes sense that they had a lot on their plate, and the devs had a whole lot of resources, they had a lot of resources, but they also had a frick ton of things they needed to try to do. And so to some extent we shouldn't be surprised that we don't get this beautifully Shakespearean Seven-esque plot that just is wonderfully woven together with the care of someone that is just trying to tell a story, because that's not what's happening, let's be honest.
Right.
So I do want to at least call that into reality, not making an excuse, but at the same time it's expectations do have to be leveled. Right. And when those expectations are exceeded, that's when something's really a masterpiece, right? If I could make all those points and if they still came out and just blew us away with the way that the story was integrated into all these new systems, then Destiny would have taken its rightful place as probably a masterpiece, or something that people would be talking about for a very long time. But it didn't, so it's not. It's a very interesting talking point, like I said.
Yeah, so and a stepping stone towards something else, something better. I'm not
Yep.
necessarily referring to Destiny 2, but it does lay the groundwork
Right.
for. I would say that it has successfully created an MMO shooter in a way that is workable, and so you can go from
Yeah.
there, that's
Yeah.
good. We need people to do pioneering stuff. Just sometimes the pioneering is really flashy, and sometimes it's like, I could see how you can make that work.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to move on to the Destiny 2 lore because we talked a lot about the Grimoire system, and obviously there's actually a whole lot on the line for Destiny 2 when it came
Right.
to the campaign. Far more so than I think any of the other systems, honestly. I think that's what people were most concerned
Right.
about was, are you not going to mess this up in such a horrible way?
Right, and I think they knew that going in, because
Oh, yeah.
if you look for like Destiny 2 lore, just type in those words, what you primarily get is not people talking about
Yeah.
Destiny 2 lore. What you primarily get, the first page of results will be Destiny 2's lore is not in Grimoire cards. That's what it's not doing. And so I
Yeah,
thought
that
that was really, as somebody who was doing that particular search in the last few days,
Yeah.
that was humorous to me.
Yeah, yeah, it was funny. I didn't realize that was going to be a thing because I got into Destiny lore before Destiny 2 was even announced, or maybe not announced, but it was far from completion. It was still Destiny 1, and so I didn't have to worry about it. But yeah, in retrospect, probably if you test in Destiny lore, all of the results are just going to be there's lore in Destiny 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is sad in of itself. That was actually that's when I think really the full scope of it made me take a step back, was when a non-negligible amount of the marketing for Destiny 2 was there's actually story in the game. And that was said unironically. The developers actually said those words. Like we just like they talked about it as if it was this new feature. Like, yeah, we were really trying to figure out how to, so actually we have like full cutscenes and like narrative in the game itself. And I was like, holy shit.
and in some ways
Oh
it
my
kind
God.
of makes
like even the developers are acknowledging this.
in some ways it kind of makes me sad, because I think there was genius and brilliance behind the Grimoire system. I think it was misapplied. It doesn't do everything, but it does do some things really well. And it's sad to me to hear like that they weren't even really thinking about how they could use it well. They were just thinking about how they could replace it. Like, we're gonna have story in the game, and that will just be purely better than having a Grimoire system. But it turns out that's not quite true.
Exactly, and that's just part of the danger of mass markets, right? Mass audiences, which is this very oversimplified. Blizzard does this, honestly, which is everyone freaked out about the Grimoire system, so we're just gonna pull the Grimoire system. Like, it's a very non-nuanced, non-thoughtful process, which is like, okay, everyone was really angry, and rightfully so. And instead of looking at like why it worked and why it didn't, we are just going to eliminate it entirely. And so they made the announcement there's going to be no Grimoire system in Destiny 2 whatsoever. And actually, some people were, there's always room for people just having double standards. But I think some people were rightly actually disappointed and sad, which is also telling, at the fact that they were losing this. So I went into Destiny. I watched the entirety of the Destiny 2 story. Like I said, all the content. There's all the playthroughs up online right now, and there's not too much, in all things considered, in terms of particularly versus Destiny 1's had multiple expansions worth, and Destiny 2 hasn't had an expansion yet, even though it's been announced. And so I do want to at least recognize that. But in terms of just overall amount of lore, Destiny 2 is behind. That being said, the campaigns were comparable and very, very different. So I actually, and again, I want to really make sure that I'm not just being a contrarian for contrarian's sake, but in some ways, I actually would take what we had in Destiny 1 over what happened in Destiny 2 lore-wise. Because what happened in Destiny 2 was just a supremely average, normal, by-the-book shooting campaign that was, like, really uninteresting to me, actually. Ironically, watching Destiny 1's campaign, even the original one, was really interesting because I'd read all this stuff about the Grimoire and knew what was going on. I was trying to piece together how the F this happened. But for Destiny 2, I didn't really have to think at all. I just... Right. It was super normal. It was a forward narrative, right? Stuff was happening. And at the complete lack... I could keep on talking about this. I want to give you time to talk too, Mark. But yeah, in large part, what we got was exactly what was promised, which was... more cutscenes, more things that happened. You can actually write a bullet point of events that happened in Destiny 2, which you can't really do in Destiny 1, amazingly. um, and that was kind of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
silence should just sit, and it's sad too because, like I said, one thing again, I want to give credit where credit's due. Destiny 2 and 1 are frighteningly beautiful games. They are beautiful to look at and to watch, and they're extremely creative. I like the fact that they're set in the solar system. So you go to the moon, you go to Mars, and you go to Venus and Mercury and Io and Titan and Earth, and each one feels extremely unique. And there's really original ideas in terms of the aesthetic, and it is beautifully rendered at every single point, in my opinion. And yet is just seemingly extremely empty.
Even just hearing your
Even
description of it, it does sound just sort of like, huh. Yeah, they just kind of settled for telling a pretty straightforward cutscene based story.
Which wasn't that good, honestly.
Well, and it seems like a story told like that would necessarily you'd sort of be limited as the scope you're talking about, right? Like the context, this is the amount of scale. Like I think it's hard to get a sense of that when you're there for all of it. Like your player is there.
That's
for
a really
all
good
of it.
point.
There's nothing
Especially
happening
with the lore
outside of the
being
world
so...
when you're not there. Like
Yeah,
that's kind of what
seriously,
it could start to make you believe. Like you
That's
are
a really
the
good
whole
point
world.
because
Yeah.
particularly the Destiny lore itself is really high-minded and space opera and esoteric, and that works in the grimoire because you can do that in all those different ways, like we were talking about, in the different forms, and it takes well to writing, honestly. But in Destiny 2, where you're just bound by the linear campaign of the game, you don't get a great sense of that huge overarching theme and world and scope and power that you're dealing with. You are kind of just reduced to a single soldier on the lines, which like I said, it's not a horrible campaign by any means. It was entertaining, but like I didn't find myself excited to know what was going to happen next. I was like, I can pretty much tell you what's going to happen through the end of the game, and I was in large part right. So, and the other thing that I found absolutely interesting was, again, with all of the complaining about a lack of campaign in Destiny 1, and then we got one in Destiny 2, and actually the most, at least for me, the best parts were the non-story missions. The playthrough I watched did a lot of the side missions and strikes and patrols and public events, and those ones actually had more flavor than the actual freaking campaign missions. The campaign missions tend to be like, restore power to this generator, or bring, clear the area so that we can reestablish communications, or plant a beacon somewhere.
Right.
Or find this person. And the side missions were more like, hey, this species called the Fallen, who are these scavenger pirates who used to be upheld by the Traveler, and the Traveler left them, and now they're kind of reduced to these warring houses. They've stolen some tech from you, and you actually have to find the Fallen who stole it, and you have to go through the different houses and do some detective work to find the individual guy, and you have to chase him across the world to get your tech back, because they steal things. That's what the Fallen do. And that tells you something about the Fallen and the way you interact with them, and the mission itself is tailored to how you might actually have to deal with this particular species, versus, say, one with the Hive, who are these kind of locust-like, animalistic, black magic people that have all these really, really powerful rituals and actually have gods and kind of exist on multiple planes and are very, very scary existentially and very dark. And you have to go disrupt a ritual which they are performing deep below the ground. You actually have to find that and find the pieces of the ritual and disrupt it in a certain way. Or the Vex, which are these people, these aliens, this AI outside of time that exist in multiple different timelines, and they've developed a new technology that involves basically an invulnerable shield that they can put up, and you have to find this before they can deploy it fully. These are all great story hooks, and they make sense for each enemy.
Right.
And the way you had to go about them was unique. Actually, the campaign missions were just go from here to here and kill everything in between, and hit 3 switches or plant 3 beacons. And they were just superbly uninteresting. And like I said, the side missions, ironically, I thought were actually the coolest narrative pieces.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Which was deeply ironic to me, because it's precisely the opposite of how it should be. It's also the last thing I kind of want to say about Destiny 2, because we have another thing that we want to talk about a little bit, which is a game some of you might have called Overwatch, or might have heard of. But the other thing about Destiny 2 that was really interesting was that, in large part, and I get it to an extent, to a very small extent, but you, as we said before, in the first game, you pretty much single-handedly like save the world several times, and are a unbelievably important character in the world, and probably everyone would know you, and you know a heck of a lot about your enemies. And then at the beginning of Destiny 2, it actually is confirmed in the game itself that you're the same Guardian. You're not just some new Guardian or something. They address you as the Guardian from the last game. And every point in the story where you meet anyone, basically the game treats you as if you don't know anything, which is really freaking annoying. Like, they have to explain who the Fallen are and what the War Mines are and all of the stuff that was like you would absolutely know. And they treat it, basically Destiny 2 treats Destiny 1 as if it didn't exist almost entirely.
Right. Which to some
sense.
extent it makes sense, right? Like if the lore was really hard to follow and they got the sense from the community that either people didn't want to follow the story or didn't care about looking at the Grimoire cards, it kind of makes sense that they would have to really talk down to even returning players who might not know the story.
Yeah, I mean that's actually very fair. It's just it's a grievous miscarriage of the setting and the IP and
Right.
the AAA studio that, I mean, Destiny 1 and 2 are going to be some of the best-selling titles of all time, much less of their year. So they're not, and Activision isn't necessarily hurting for money, but so that's annoying. The last thing I want to just mention with both the campaigns was the one thing that I kind of liked about the Grimoire being form and function meeting in terms of you as the character not knowing much and being able to discover these things and piece them together. Another nice little kind of, form and function mechanic that I really liked and actually thought about with Halo specifically was you actually learn a lot about the people you're fighting by fighting them, which is cool because that's the thing that you do in the game. You shoot people.
Right.
And the fact there's a very elegant, like with the Covenant, for example, the elites that lead a pack of grunts. When you kill the elite, the grunts panic and they run away and they actually say things and sometimes they'll regroup in small groups. But if one gets separated, he's going to run and yell. So you learn something very simple about the grunts and what they must be like in society and the fact that the elites must be above them, or the brutes move in packs. And they have a leader with a very large crest on his head, and if you do enough damage to them, they go berserk and begin attacking you in melee and get a lot hard to kill. Or even the idea of the drones that only show up in giant swarms, or the flood. You can see the entire flood life cycle just by playing the game. You understand that there are these parasites that jump onto something and infect them, and then those become the combat form, and then apparently something happens and they'll swell up into a big brain form, and then when you shoot the brain, more infected come out. Like, that's incredible. It's completely intuitive. You don't get told that at any point. You just understand that playing the game.
Right.
Destiny does and that's why I like some of the side missions. Like I said, it gave some of the enemies some flavor, but in large part, the game, I couldn't tell any difference in strategy in the fights. The fights were almost all identical, no matter who you were fighting, with a few small exceptions. But basically, everyone felt pretty much the same in terms of the way that you had to fight them, which is, again, a very sad miscarriage of some really compelling antagonists in terms of the Hive and the Cabal and the Vex and the Fallen, which are your main bad guys in the Taken.
Similar to sort of a Diablo style, just like mow them all down. Like in Diablo, I don't know how to take out specific enemies, really. I mean, I know the moves that work for my class, but I don't necessarily need to know everybody's weakness or anything.
Exactly. And so that was one thing that, like I said, maybe in the meta-narrative sense, Halo wasn't remarkable, but one thing it did really well was that kind of showing, not telling, that Destiny does really poorly at, which is being able to understand something about the people you're fighting by fighting them, which is the whole game. So, yeah, I got a lot of problems with the Destiny 2 mode of lore, ironically, seeing as how Destiny 1, of course, was a trash fire as well.
Right.
In some ways, but I also have, it's a weird soft spot that I have because I like the lore so much, so I'm sure I make excuses for it, but so do you want to close out here, Mark, contrasting with Overwatch?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we were talking, I was trying to think of another game that did do a lot of external storytelling but did not catch a bunch of heat like Destiny did, and that the game that came to mind was Overwatch, because have actually Blizzard has specifically talked about how they want to do a lot of the story development outside of Overwatch. So they've done animated shorts. They've done, I believe they've actually done some not graphic novels, but like little
comics.
Yeah, comics.
Interactive comics. They've done short stories.
Yeah, there's little clips of dialogue and stuff in the game that hint at some of these things. But for the most part, the detailed history of the game is in these extra extra medium, I guess, sort of places
Yeah,
where you can watch a
step
video
outside.
or read a comic. And so uh, I think one of the reasons that this works so well with Overwatch is because there isn't any plot advancement that needs to happen in the game. And Greg brought this up when we were talking, that Overwatch isn't a game where there is a plot happening, but it is a game that frequently references things that have happened. It's constantly looking back. People are reminiscing. People are promising to make good on old threats between,
Yeah, yeah,
Soldier and Reaper, and Anna talks to her daughter, and just all these things are hinted at in a way that makes you curious. But then you can go back and look to see what happened, past tense, because
yeah,
nothing is happening in the game plot-wise.
yeah.
It's a great game, but it's not a game where there's plot.
There's literally no narrative, right? The time never moves forward. You're never gonna have an event
Exactly.
happen and then Tracer dies and you can't play as Tracer anymore. Like
Right.
that's not the game, right? It's not the point.
So I think the reason that having so much of the content outside of the game works so well hinges on this one fact, that there
Right.
is no forward motion in the game. And so you can do a lot of retrospective storytelling because that's the only storytelling you need to do. You could
Right.
have put flashbacks and cutscenes and things like that in the game, fine, but you just as well can do that with stories outside of the game.
Right. And they're actually entirely comparable in terms of the way, if not even flashbacks being superior, right, as a medium, where you
Right.
don't have to worry about any semblance of changing the status quo or affecting gameplay even a little bit, or the effect that it'll have on the players, or balancing or releases or anything like that. It is entirely self-contained. That kind of brings me back to what we were talking about with the resource allocation part of it, where for for Destiny, you had to integrate every ounce of story with gameplay as well. When you have just a completely separate story division, where it doesn't have to worry at all about that, you actually have some real artistic freedom there. And the stories they've gotten to tell are really, really cool. Actually, I've actually really enjoyed them. A lot of the comics are really compelling, and of course, there's some level of just the character design, just in general, is so immensely creative and fun that you just innately care about this world. But there is some level that they did have a very, very different task in story development. So it seems weird that on one hand we were ripping on the Grimoire cards for being totally removed from the story, in the same way that you would have to leave Overwatch to find any of the lore.
Right.
But because of just the difference in genre, the difference in intent, the difference in communication of that lore, and the way that affects you as a player, it actually doesn't matter. Actually, it makes up for it. It works in one way
Right.
and fails massively in the other. Because you don't need to this is a great point Mark brought up, which is basically like Destiny attempted to build a whole solar system, a whole world, right, with some open space and places that you can inhabit and go and feel like you are a part of, and that changes as you move. Overwatch is not that. There's no. It's just a bunch of maps. It's just a
Right.
few completely self-contained maps that are built specifically just to be played upon,
Right.
for no other reason.
At best,
And
it's like a scrimmage between old friends / allies. It's a reunion of sorts.
sure, yeah. Yeah, and so there's no narrative weight on that whatsoever, and so yeah, that actually frees them up to be incredibly creative and not need that, which is interesting because we always talk about like, well, not always, but as of late I've been thinking a lot about form and function in games
Mm-hmm.
and the melding of those and how important that is. But with Overwatch, it's interesting in that, like, in theory, you should kind of it'd be difficult to have a game with completely no storyline, no narrative that is still fun to any regard. Like, that you need some reason to be doing the thing that you're doing, right? Like, mine is like Minesweeper. Like, even that has at least a bare bones minimum that you're looking for mines. Like, it's not
Mhm.
just data, it's not just like zeros and ones. So you need like some semblance of story in a game. But it's really interesting that like obviously Overwatch actually has overall, right? If you just were to like measure the volume of lore it has, Destiny has immeasurably more lore, in my opinion.
Right.
I don't think we could argue otherwise there. And yet it is only been praised for that, actually. And hasn't been hurt at all in terms of either reputation or the ability to enjoy the game. And Destiny's failure in lore really impacted people's ability to enjoy the game, to actually enjoy the experience of what it was trying to sell them. So I think it's just a very, very interesting case study, and like
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to matter necessarily the amount of lore, or the amount of story, or the I don't know, the like I said, just mass of it, the volume of it.
Right.
It is the integration and the quality of it.
And I think expectations are so important here too. Like the perceived like genre of Overwatch versus Destiny is very important. Like
Yeah.
if it's coming out of Bungie, who has previously made Halo, like how can
good
you
point.
not
Yeah,
draw comparisons to Halo? Whereas over like Blizzard has recently done what? Like Hearthstone and Heroes of the Storm? Like these are not
right.
games with intense plot and say
Entirely
what you
removed,
want
yeah.
about the Warcraft lore and the Starcraft lore. It's good. I mean, I'm sure Greg, you could tell me so much about the intricacies and the highlights of that lore. But especially recently, like Blizzard has not been making games that have a really deep, complex backstory.
Yeah, not at all, not at all. And that's a cool point too. Like the Halo lore was very well received. Actually, it was something people loved about. I mean, it spawned entire series of books, spawned a short film actually, multiple other games and comics and media. That was very, very well received. And so yeah, absolutely, Destiny had a big shoes to fill as opposed to Overwatch, which was a completely new IP from a studio that didn't have a whole lot of. We weren't really counting on, like you said, particularly in terms of past releases, have not been too story heavy, particularly lately. But two, the other interesting thing that I want to note before we end, which was Overwatch was birthed from a project not unlike Destiny, actually, which was going to be an attempt at a shared world MMO first-person shooter,
Right.
class-based, which obviously eventually didn't come to pass, and we got Overwatch, which I'm not complaining about because Overwatch I think is a masterpiece. But is very interesting that both these stories seem to have come out at similar times when Titan got canceled and when Destiny came out. That and they're both high. Like say we will, Blizzard is absolutely innovative in a lot of ways, and Bungie was with Halo for sure, from two innovative studios. And it's just very interesting to me that Blizzard canceled their project entirely and built because they couldn't find the game. They couldn't make all the pieces work together. And instead of pushing it through, they went with something they knew was going to be good. And Overwatch has become one of the most successful games of all time. And then Destiny did get pushed through and launched and is a byword for controversy now. I mean, say what you will about the sales, but like it is probably more reviled than loved in a lot of ways,
In terms of like
so interesting to me.
The history
I don't want to read
of
too
gaming,
much into it, but like
the historical significance of Destiny was not as great as it probably could have been.
Yes,
it's not very big at all.
Sure.
It's nothing like Halo.
Oh, for sure. It's just very interesting to me, wondering just like corporate decisions and like, say we will about Blizzard in a lot of ways, but they really do try to. I really truly believe that they only try to put out stuff that's good. In terms of the gameplay first has always been their mantra, and it's very interesting to me that basically two identical games, at least in genre, were getting developed, and it seemed like there were a lot of problems with the genre, and it was really hard. And Blizzard opted to do something they knew was going to be good, and then Bungie kept going, and the two stories kind of tell themselves. So.
Yeah, it is kind of telling, and it makes me wonder. This is something that's sort of been in the back of my head pondering video games lately, which is what are the games that just really can't work? Like what are the genres and what are the types of games that you can play, like make? You can think of them, but in practice you can't actually execute them. There are lots of cool ideas, like an MMORTS, cool idea. Everybody has like an intuitive sense of kind of what that would be like. But then when you go to execute it, it turns out that either it's not possible or it just has not been done successfully yet and might not be possible.
It's been tried a few times. None of them worked.
And so it's
Company Heroes Online, Command & Conquer Online.
And with any like genre, you run into that, right? Where like you can kind of maybe have an intuitive sense of how something would go together, but when you really drill down into it, it doesn't quite work.
Right.
Anyway, so I've just been thinking about that lately, but this might be one of those cases where just MMO first-person shooters with good storytelling and all the things we would want might be a unicorn. It hasn't been seen yet, so.
And I think that's what a lot of people thought too, and we've seen that too over with games that promise a whole lot and then don't really live up to it. The classic being No Man's Sky recently, but been plenty of examples of that, particularly kind of with the Kickstarter movement. But I do remember actually remember very vividly a friend, one of my older brother's friends, who I'm really, really close with too, was telling me he's always kind of up on the latest stuff in gaming before I was into the news side of it as much as just playing. And 'cause when Destiny 1 got announced, I must have been still in like high school or something. But and he told me this idea that like, yeah, it was this crazy thing where like, yeah, you'd just be out in the world and at any point like he could just come join me. Like there'd be a ship that would fly over and then I would like beam down and we'd be like playing together. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy. And then I heard that there was going to be like loot. I heard there was going to be multiplayer. There was going to be a full single player campaign. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. Even the best games of a genre are really genre specific, right? You think of like the best action RPGs, the best character based RPGs, the best racing games they're really specific, right? They're not like hybrid games.
Right.
Not saying hybrid games can't work, but the best ones of a genre are going to be that. So I was like, how are you going to combine all of those pieces and have all of them come out, especially with the technological constraints at the time? And yeah, I don't know. I think the argument can be made very easily that Destiny was an example of overpromising and underdelivering, particularly in terms of the narrative sequence, but also in terms of trying to manage 14 different things that they hadn't had to do before. So
Right.
it's hard, right? Like innovation has to have that. I don't want to like just say they shouldn't have done it, but at the same time, it does beg a question for studios of what limits you're trying to push and then where your resources are going to go for that. On one hand, you could say, I mean, like I said, Destiny was a massive financial success. So,
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing I was going to mention is that hype drives sales for a time. Like it really works. It works in stock markets. It works in selling games. Like getting people excited about stuff is profitable, but long term can create some problems for your brand. But lest we lose sort of the thesis of this particular show, I will summarize by saying that I think the Grimoire system and having storytelling done outside of the game proper is successful for doing sort of retrospective storytelling and context building, for building a larger picture of what's going on in the world that you inhabit in-game. That's how Overwatch uses it to great success, and when Destiny 1 uses it for that, it's great. When Destiny 1 uses it to tell you what you just did in one mission that you like literally went and did, it's not great because it just feels kind of cheap and steals the momentum from the accomplishment that you literally just made in front of you and now are reading about. And so for that, cutscenes and typical devices like in-game dialogue and that's better for advancing the plot in the moment, kind of what you would expect. Like if I'm on an important mission in person, like I'm going to expect the things that I'm doing to be the most important thing and for people to be interacting with me in a way that fills me in on what's happening. I'm not expecting to have to read about it. Like I don't go out and do something really important and then think, oh, I hope that's in the paper so I know what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a big, I don't know. That's a really interesting point. The fact that like you are entirely bound by your genre in terms of forward like motion, like narratively, like having a really important, like being able to manage both the backstory, backwards narrative, and the forwards narrative is actually a really hard thing to do, I think, in games. Because especially with a new IP, right, where no one knows anything about it.
Right.
You do need to world build, you need to establish, you need to give all this interesting context and reasons, but you also need to be doing something. That's the point. So that interplay is actually something I want to think more about and think about how other games do that, right? Like think about like Arkham City, which I just played. Everyone knows Batman. You don't have to worry too much about the backstory. I mean, some of the specifics, right, in terms of like the version, but in large part, you start Arkham City and you know everything you need to know about Joker and Two-Face and Batman and their histories and Bruce Wayne and why he is the way he is, because it's just ubiquitous. And then all the games just forward motion, just telling a story.
And I would be curious to see how this would be done in a game specifically, but I definitely think of the Bourne series where they're filling him in about his previous life, and obviously he's doing important things in the moment. So that's pretty interesting.
Well, the whole point of his forward motion is to find out the things from the past, though.
Right.
Born. It's entirely all of his actions and motivations are to figure out who he is. So it actually is this kind of like loop that works really well, though. Or like, I think Indiana Jones is similar in some ways, right? Finding these ancient artifacts or things and uncovering these mysteries is the point of what he's doing in real time.
Right.
So that works well there.
Well,
cool. I think it's a pretty good stepping point, actually. We do not have a huge announcement for next week because we have a bunch of ideas.
Right.
But we haven't solidified which we're gonna do next week. We do have a idea for a theme at the turn of the new year, actually.
Yeah,
which,
get excited.
It's gonna be exciting. To finish out the year, we're trying to figure out kind of specifically what we're gonna do. But rest assured, we have plenty of ideas.
And we will see you all soon. So thanks for tuning in. If you've got questions, thoughts, you can email me at mark@gamingmechanics.net. You can email Greg at gamingmechanics.net. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye, guys.
Peace out, guys.
If you enjoyed this episode of Gaming Mechanics, check out our Twitter at Gaming Mechanics or our Facebook by going to facebook.com/gamingmechanics. Thanks for listening.